The billionaire sat in his study, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows, casting golden streaks across his polished mahogany desk. Alexander Kane was a man of power, wealth, and a reputation that walked into the room long before he did. People admired him, feared him, envied him, but very few understood him. At 50, he had conquered industries, turned companies into empires, and amassed a fortune so great that the mention of his name stirred awe. Yet in all his victories, Alexander had learned one bitter truth: people often loved him not for who he was, but for what he owned. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass, eyes fixed on 4 small black cards laid neatly in front of him. They weren't ordinary credit cards, they were limitless, elite symbols of power. He studied them as though they were loaded dice, tools of revelation rather than simple money. His mind was made up. He wanted to test the people closest to him, strip away their masks, and see who they truly were when temptation was laid bare. With a deep breath, he pressed the intercom. "Send them in." The heavy double doors creaked open, and 4 women entered one by one. First was Clarissa, his girlfriend, a woman draped in silk, her wrists glittering with diamonds. She had beauty and charm, but her laughter often rang hollow to him. Then came his sister, Helena, whose privileged life had never known the cold bite of struggle. She smiled warmly at him, though behind her polished exterior he sensed a hunger for status that never dimmed. Next was his business partner, Victoria, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, her ambition so fierce that Alexander had often wondered if she admired him, or only his empire. Finally, trailing quietly at the back, came Maria, his maid. She wore a simple gray dress and held her hands folded neatly, her eyes lowered to the floor. Unlike the others, she seemed uncomfortable even standing in the grand study. Alexander gestured toward the seats. "Sit." The 3 women perched themselves with confidence, but Maria remained standing until he motioned for her to take the last chair. He let silence settle over the room for a moment, enjoying the way it made them restless. Then he spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "I've built a life that people dream of, a fortune beyond comprehension. But wealth is a double-edged sword, it reveals more than it hides. Today, I want to see what each of you would do with power in your hands." He reached across the desk and slid the 4 black cards toward them. Each one glimmered under the light. The women exchanged puzzled glances, though Clarissa's lips curled into an eager smile. "These," Alexander continued, "are yours. Each one has no limit. Spend them as you please. Tomorrow, you'll return them to me, and I'll see the results." Clarissa snatched hers almost instantly, her eyes sparkling as if Christmas had arrived early. Helena accepted hers with a practiced grace, though Alexander noticed her fingers tightening around it, betraying her excitement. Victoria smirked knowingly, already calculating her strategic purchases. Then came Maria. She hesitated, looking at the card as if it were a forbidden object. When she finally reached out, her touch was gentle, almost reluctant. She whispered, "Yes, sir," though her voice carried uncertainty. Alexander leaned back, watching their reactions like a hawk. "Remember, this is not a gift. It is a mirror. What you choose will reflect who you are." The room buzzed with unspoken energy. Clarissa already envisioned jewelry stores, Helena imagined boutique racks, and Victoria considered deals she could close with one bold swipe. But Maria sat quietly, holding the card against her palm, her brow furrowed. Unlike the others, she didn't look thrilled, she looked burdened. Alexander noticed, though he said nothing. Instead, he raised his glass and dismissed them with a wave of his hand. As they filed out, he remained seated in his study, staring into the amber liquid, wondering if, at last, this test would show him something real. Clarissa was the first to set the tone of extravagance. The next morning, she emerged from the mansion's gates draped in a designer trench coat, stepping into the chauffeur-driven Bentley Alexander had provided. She laughed lightly, her phone pressed to her ear as she told her friend, "He finally handed me the key to the kingdom." The driver steered toward the city's most exclusive shopping district, where Clarissa wasted no time. The first swipe of the black card was at a jewelry store where diamond necklaces shimmered under bright lights like caged stars. She tried on piece after piece, pouting at the mirror until she found one so large it almost mocked subtlety. "Wrap it up," she said with a smirk. The salesman, bowing at her command, had no idea she didn't own the wealth she was flaunting, it belonged to Alexander. By noon, her arms were heavy with bags, each one stamped with the names of luxury brands. To her, it wasn't about the items themselves but about being seen as the woman who could buy them. Meanwhile, Helena, Alexander's sister, began her spree with an air of entitlement that only years of comfort could breed. She strolled into a high-end boutique where she was greeted like royalty. The black card flashed in her hand as she ordered racks of clothes to be brought to her. Dresses in silk, gowns dripping with sequins, handbags of crocodile leather, all piled higher and higher. She wasn't careless, though. She chose each piece with the precision of someone who had long understood the value of appearances. These will do well for the charity gala, she told herself aloud, imagining how the cameras would capture her. By mid-afternoon, she had booked herself a 2-week spa retreat in the Alps, her voice light with amusement as she confirmed her reservation. Yes, charge it here, she said, sliding the card across the counter as though it were simply an extension of her hand. Victoria, the business partner, was different. She wasn't seduced by gowns or jewels, her hunger was sharper. She walked into a sleek office downtown, where a nervous broker awaited her. With the black card in hand, she authorized bold transactions, company shares, rare art pieces to be flipped later, property deposits. Every decision was calculated, each investment a way to turn Alexander's trust into a display of her intelligence. To her, this wasn't indulgence, it was strategy. When he sees how I multiplied his money, she murmured, he'll know who truly deserves his empire. Her eyes gleamed, not with joy, but with ambition. But Maria was different. She stepped off the bus in the oldest part of the city, far away from polished boutiques and glittering storefronts. The black card felt heavy in her pocket, not like a prize but like a responsibility. Her first stop was a small grocery store where shelves were often half empty. She filled carts with rice, bread, milk, and fruit, watching as children pressed their faces to the glass, their mothers too poor to buy more than scraps. With quiet hands, she asked the shopkeeper to distribute the food to the families who owed him debts. From there, she walked to the orphanage where the paint peeled from the walls and the playground was rusted with age. The caretaker's eyes filled with disbelief as Maria arranged for new toys, fresh clothes, and warm blankets. Are you sure? The woman asked, clutching the receipt as if it were made of gold. Maria only nodded, her lips curved into a small, humble smile. Her final stop was the hospital, where patients lay waiting for medicines they couldn't afford. She stood by the counter as doctors gaped at the sudden donation, the black card gliding through the machine to cover wheelchairs, medical supplies, and treatment costs for those who had no insurance. Use it all, she whispered, blinking back tears as she watched a mother clasp her child's hand with hope that hadn't existed an hour before. As night fell, Maria returned to her small room in the mansion with nothing but tired feet and a quiet heart. The black card, still warm from her day's choices, lay on the table beside her bed. She touched it lightly and murmured to herself, maybe this was meant to do some good. Meanwhile, Alexander, though he hadn't accompanied her, had already heard reports from his driver. Unlike the other three, Maria hadn't treated the card like a ticket to vanity or greed. She had turned it into a lifeline for others. He sat in his study that evening, the thought of her choices refusing to leave his mind. Tomorrow, he knew, the truth would be revealed. The next evening, the grand dining hall glowed under the warm light of crystal chandeliers. The long table gleamed with polished silverware and tall glasses, yet no food had been laid out. Instead, 4 sleek black envelopes rested neatly at Alexander Kane's end of the table. He sat at the head, posture rigid, his piercing eyes fixed on the doors as he awaited the women. Tonight, masks would fall. Clarissa swept in first, her wrists jingling with brand-new diamond bangles, her dress unmistakably fresh from a designer boutique. She carried herself with exaggerated poise, as though the very air in the mansion were a runway. Helena followed, dressed in a velvet gown, her smile smug, her aura announcing that she had spent the day bathing in luxury. Victoria entered briskly, her stride businesslike, a folder in her hand, proof of her investments. And finally, Maria walked in quietly, her gray dress unchanged, her step soft, her gaze lowered. Alexander gestured to the seats. Sit. Tonight, we talk about choices. As they settled, the silence pressed heavy, broken only by the flicker of candles. Alexander picked up the first envelope. Clarissa. She leaned forward, her lips parting in anticipation. He slid out the receipts and skimmed them aloud. Diamonds, dresses, handbags, perfumes. His tone was unreadable, but his eyes flicked upward, sharp. Clarissa laughed, brushing her hair over her shoulder. Darling, what did you expect? A woman in my place must look the part. I only did what any woman by your side should. Her confidence filled the room, but Alexander remained still, sliding her envelope to the side. He turned to Helena next. My dear sister. He opened her receipts. Designer gowns. Retreat in the Alps. Spa reservations. Exotic furs. Helena smiled, unapologetic. Alex, you know me. These things aren't frivolous, they're statements. They tell the world who we are. Your name deserves prestige, and I ensure I wear it well. Her chin lifted proudly, as though she had won his approval already. Alexander's lips curved, though it was not quite a smile. He set her envelope down and reached for Victoria's. She sat straighter, ready to shine. He pulled out the receipts, noting stocks, art acquisitions, property deposits. Interesting, he said at last. Victoria smirked. I didn't squander it on vanity. I multiplied it. In 24 hours, I turned spending into profit. Who else here can say the same? She glanced smugly at the others. You don't need ornaments or spa days beside you, Alexander. You need someone who thinks like you. Someone who can build an empire even greater than yours. Her words rang with ambition, almost defiant. Alexander studied her, silent for a long moment, before laying her envelope flat on the table. Finally, his hand hovered over the last envelope. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Maria. She shifted uneasily in her seat, her hands clasped in her lap. Alexander pulled out her receipts and began to read. His voice slowed, heavy with something none of the others had heard from him before. Groceries, children's toys, blankets, medicines, wheelchairs, hospital donations, repairs for the orphanage roof, books for the library. The room went still. Clarissa's brows shot up, Helena frowned, and Victoria let out a short, incredulous laugh. Alexander set the papers down and looked at Maria. Explain. Maria swallowed, her voice trembling yet steady. You gave me more than I've ever held in my life. I couldn't spend it on myself while so many around us suffer. The orphanage has holes in its roof, the hospital lacked medicine, and children sleep cold. I thought, if the card was truly limitless, then maybe kindness could be limitless too. Her words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. Clarissa scoffed, rolling her eyes. What nonsense. She wasted it on strangers. Helena's tone was sharp. Alexander, surely you see this was foolish. No prestige comes from buying bread for beggars. Victoria sneered, shaking her head. She doesn't understand leverage. Every dollar should work for gain, not pity. But Alexander remained silent, staring at Maria as though seeing her for the first time. There was no vanity in her gaze, no hunger for power, only humility and conviction. For years he had surrounded himself with people who chased his wealth, yet here sat the maid who had used his riches not for herself, but for others. The silence stretched long, until at last Alexander spoke, his voice quiet but firm. You've all shown me who you are. The women shifted uneasily as his words echoed. Tomorrow, they would learn what his judgment meant. But tonight, he couldn't shake the feeling that Maria's choices had pierced through his fortress of cynicism and left him unsettled, speechless. The night deepened, the chandeliers dimmed, and still the tension in the dining hall had not lifted. The three women, Clarissa, Helena, and Victoria, sat with folded arms and proud eyes, their arguments already rehearsed in case Alexander demanded justification once more. Maria, by contrast, sat silently, her gaze lowered to the polished surface of the table, as though her reflection embarrassed her. Alexander rose from his chair, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the room. He clasped his hands behind his back and paced slowly, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. You know, he began, his voice deliberate, I've been surrounded by wealth for decades. People bow, they flatter, they follow me into the fire if I wave a checkbook. But when I look at the choices you've made with power in your hands, I see reflections of the very world I built. Vanity, indulgence, ambition. Clarissa lifted her chin. And what's wrong with that, darling? Power is meant to be displayed. Helena added quickly, brother, prestige is necessary. We carry your name. We must look the part. Victoria leaned forward, her tone sharp. And empires are not built on sentiment. You know that better than anyone. Alexander stopped pacing. His gaze snapped to them, cold and unwavering. Empires built without humanity are nothing but prisons of gold. The words stunned them into silence. He turned then to Maria. She stiffened, not expecting his focus to fall so heavily upon her. And you, he said softly, almost with wonder. You had the same tool as they did. You could have bought yourself anything. You could have walked out of that small room in the servants' wing. And never looked back. But you didn't. You gave. Maria's lips trembled. Sir, I didn't mean to impress you. I only thought of the children who hadn't eaten, the sick who had no medicine. It felt wrong to take for myself when their need was greater. Her humility cut through the air like a blade, sharper than any speech. Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried a weight the others had never seen in him before. He walked back to his seat, his movements slower now, as though the test had taken something out of him. Sitting, he folded his hands atop the table. Clarissa, Helena, Victoria, he said at last. You failed, not because you spent, because you showed me nothing I didn't already know. Your greed, your pride, your endless hunger, it has no place beside me any longer. Clarissa gasped, her diamond bracelets clinking as she clutched her chest. You can't mean that. I do, Alexander cut her off, his tone final. Helena's protests rose, Victoria's arguments sharpened, but with one cold look, he silenced them. Leave. The cars will take you wherever you wish to go. But after tonight, you no longer have a place in my life. The three women exchanged stunned, furious glances before rising, their chairs scraping harshly against the floor. Clarissa stormed out first, Helena followed with stiff dignity, and Victoria lingered a moment, her glare like a dagger. You'll regret throwing away strength for pity, she hissed, before sweeping out of the hall. The heavy doors closed, and silence fell. Only Alexander and Maria remained. She shifted uneasily, rising halfway from her seat. I should go too, sir. But Alexander shook his head. His voice, stripped of its usual steel, was quiet. No, you stay. Maria froze, her eyes wide. He leaned forward, his hands pressed flat on the table. Do you know what you've done to me? In a single day, you've reminded me of something I forgot long ago, that wealth means nothing if it doesn't change lives. I gave you that card expecting vanity or fear. Instead, you gave me the one thing no one else has in years, truth. Maria's throat tightened, her hands twisting nervously. I only did what I thought was right. Alexander rose once more and approached her. He stopped just a step away, studying her as though she were a puzzle he had long tried to solve. Slowly, he took the black card from his pocket and placed it in her hands again. This isn't a test anymore, he said softly. This is trust. Use it as you see fit. The world needs more of your kind, and so do I. Her breath caught. She tried to protest, shaking her head, but he raised a hand gently. No arguments. From tonight, you're not just the maid in this house. You're the reason I still believe in humanity. Maria's eyes brimmed with tears, though she quickly blinked them away. She bowed her head, whispering, "Thank you, sir." Alexander, a man who had commanded boardrooms and conquered industries, found himself uncharacteristically speechless. For the first time in years, it wasn't wealth or power that moved him, it was compassion. And in that quiet moment, he realized the maid had succeeded where empires had failed. She had touched his heart.